Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jackie and Teresa, for having me here today for the Storytellers Summit. I'm super excited to be here today and share one of my favorite things, writing for kids, how to harness your inner childlike wonder to write for kids. So whether you write for children now or you're considering it, I'm going to share today how to harness your inner childlike wonder and hopefully create an engaging story idea that teens and tweens can connect with while steering clear of those stories that can fall flat. We definitely don't want to do that. And today we'll also be digging deep into the mindset of young readers to understand how to write a story that gets inside their hearts. And don't worry about taking too many notes today because I have created a handy guide for you that you'll be able to download a PDF with all the details that I'm sharing today. So you can definitely reference it when you go back and you're writing your own story. I just wanted to mention that so you don't have to take too many notes. So let's jump in. Oh, and by the way, you probably can guess, here's a picture of me from when I was a young girl in a great giggle fest that I'm having, childlike wonder. I don't know what I was doing at that moment, but it's fun to wonder. And I'm wearing this giant ring, which is actually a lion ring, because that's a tribute to my favorite character in my favorite book at the time, which was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. So let's jump in here. First, I want to talk about defining kid-lit audiences. And I've just thrown up here some of my favorite books, middle grade and young adult, MG and YA, across all different genres. We've got contemporary, fantasy, survival, dystopian, spooky, all stories about friendship and all sorts of things. And when we're talking about middle grade and young adult specifically, the middle grade audience is generally ages 8 to 12. And the young adult audience is generally ages 13 to 17. So definitely something to keep in mind. Also keep in mind that edgy topics would be geared more for that young adult audience, those teenagers. It's really difficult to sell MG or publish it for that audience because you've got gatekeepers, you've got teachers, librarians, educators, parents, guardians, all of those things. So if you do have romance in a middle grade, I suggest upper middle grade, like ages 10 to 12, and have it be real sweet, a crush, maybe one kiss, which is something I actually have in my book out in 2025, which is Loon Coast Summer. I have a little bit of a crush in that book, which was fun to write. Also remember with kidlit audiences that kids do read up. You may already know this. So if your reader is age 9 or 10, they may be reading about a 12-year-old character, but keep in mind that the content still has to be appropriate for a 9-year-old for sure. So just to generalize, because we're not going to get real deep into this today, it's a pretty brief presentation, but when it comes to content for middle grade and young adult audiences, these readers tend to live in the moment. Whatever age level you write for in children's books, the main character and their friends, other young characters in the book, should be solving the conflict and making the decisions, not the adult. So I just want you to keep that in mind when you're writing for kids. Now, let's talk about how kids read. And here's a fun picture of my son, Joshua. He's 23 now, but he's about 10 or 11 in this picture. He's reading one of my favorite books when I was his age, Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl. I had all of Roald Dahl's books. I used to get them from the Tooth Fairy, under my pillow, from my mom. And this is a really sweet picture of a young reader. She's a fan of my Unicorn Island series, and her mom sent me a picture of her with all 3 books that I think she read in a day. I mean, they're short books, but still, this is how kids read. They devour books, and that's really different from how grown-ups can read. I was reading recently that most grown-ups read 5 books or less a year, which is really sad, but that might not be our group here, those statistics. But kids devour books. I mean, do you remember doing this? Reading a book in a day or 2, having that flashlight under the covers when you're supposed to be asleep. I know I definitely did. And that first book I fell in love with was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I was 7 and I thought, that's it. I'm going to become a writer. I'm going to write stories. And I did. I wrote my first story. It was about a wizard, dodo birds, and a flying ship. And I've been writing fantasy ever since, and now also realistic stories too. So go back in time. Think about that first book you fell in love with, and maybe even this first story that you read. So let's talk about finding that idea for your young readers. And I just thrown some books up here across all different genres. There's a couple of mine here. Lunco Summer, which came out in 2025. The Secret Winners Club, which is coming out March 2026, and some other favorite books of mine as well. So when it comes to finding that idea, that big idea for your book, don't worry about finding an idea that has already been written. You might have heard that every story has been done before. Boy meets girl, stranger comes to town, hero goes on a journey. You can write these. Just put your own spin on it. Nobody else will have your own unique voice for young readers than you. You will have your own unique ideas and put a spin on that. The key to finding an idea really is thinking big. How can you write a story that puts your characters in deep trouble? That is life-changing. What event will shake them to the core? Why are you passionate about writing this story? What big questions do you want to explore? Things to think about when you're trying to find that big idea. Think big, life-changing moments for your young readers. For example, the young adult book, The Hunger Games, which some of you may have read, it's about a big idea. It's about finding the strength to fight to the death for something that you believe in. That's big stuff, life-changing stuff for your characters and for your young readers. Now, keep in mind, your young readers that you're writing for, they're living busy, mundane, often overwhelming lives they need something to uplift them, inspire them, transport them. So give them something to read that surprises them, that thrills them, that lifts them up and transports them to another world from the one that they are in. Think universal themes and explore that for a big idea. This could be loss, grief, abandonment, betrayal, yearning, love, belonging, acceptance, home. All of these things are in these books right here that you see on the screen. These are big universal themes. So I write for kids for fantasy, but I also write contemporary stories. And I love writing stories based in fantasy and mythology too. My first book that came out, Joshua and the Lightning Road, is a fantasy story with Greek mythology. And I really think mythology stories can resonate with young readers because mythology tales are ageless, they're timeless, and they deal with those universal truths that teens and tweens are experiencing themselves in both painful and wonderful ways. You've got conflict, love, loss, friendship, many mythic story structures and conflict and archetypes can also help you shape your own character's journey and help you find that idea. So look to mythology tales if you're looking for that big idea, that big life-changing story that you can write about with those big moments. Now, let's get into the mind of young readers. Very different than the minds of adults, in case you're wondering. So these young readers, whether it's middle grade, 8 to 12, young adult, 13 to 17, they are living in a contrasting world. They truly, truly are. They want to be loyal to their family and their friends, but they also crave independence. They want to define themselves with their own identity, but they also want to fit in. They feel this yearning to grow up and make big choices, but when things get tough, they really want to be taken care of. They want somebody else to make the hard decisions for them. And these young readers, they're focused on themselves often. Friendships start to get complicated during this time in their life. And things they thought about themselves, their parents, their friends, they're changing. Think about it when you were this age, right? That 8 to 17 years old, maybe you're seeing things for the first time. People are changing. Maybe you thought your parents were invincible and almost inhuman, that they didn't have feelings, that they couldn't be hurt. And then you discovered they are invincible. They do have flaws. So this is what your young readers are also experiencing in their life. And they're having many new experiences for the very first time. Maybe they're making their first friend, getting their first pet, catching their first fish, going on their first vacation. All these things we experienced as middle graders, as young adults, that we can never go back and experience for the first time. This is what your young readers are experiencing. So bottom line is, write a story that is relatable to your young readers. And these are some ways that you can do it. Also, engage kids. So before we get into harnessing that inner childlike wonder, I want to talk about ways that you can engage kids in your stories. Definitely want to get deep into the mind of your characters because kidlit readers want to love their characters passionately and also hate their characters passionately for sure. Another key thing is to jump right into the middle of the story. This is also known as in media res, where we just start the story jumping right in. I know young readers love this. Also, young writers love this because I do a lot of author school visits. One of my favorite things to do as a children's book author, I go to elementary and middle schools. And when I do classroom programs, I actually do this writing exercise with them that's super fun. I have the kids pick out of a hat a setting and a character, and then they have to create a story or start writing a story within a certain time frame and share if they like. And all of these young writers and readers always start right in the middle of the action. Things are happening, blowing up, people are being chased, just all kinds of action is going on, excitement, even if it's in dialogue. So they know to jump right in the middle. Unlike sometimes us as adult writers, I know this happens to me, we can start that story and get bogged down in world building and backstory. Kids don't do that. And that's definitely not what they want in their own stories that they read. And you might have heard this expression, show more versus telling in your story. This is so especially true when you're writing for young readers because showing more of what's happening in that story means your young reader can feel more of an active participant in the story, which is what you want. They can feel like they are these characters, they can become these characters, and they are experiencing this world through your character's eyes and therefore making it their own experience. Just want to get that in there about how to engage kids. Jump right in, right? Another fun way that I've discovered in writing stories to engage kids is to thrill them. So, no matter what genre you're writing, it could be contemporary, fantasy, spooky stuff, right? A thriller for kids, or just a quiet contemporary whether it's suspenseful or not. Big actions can thrill them, adventure can thrill them. I started out writing thrillers for adults, actually. And my editor at the time told me, well, because I had this young character in my adult thriller, she said, you have this really natural young voice. You should explore that. So I did. I started writing middle grade, and that was it. I was a goner. I fell in love with writing in the space where we have one foot in childhood, one foot heading into adulthood, and can still believe in magic. But I also learned there's a lot of crossing over between writing thrillers for adults and writing thrillers and adventures for kids. And as my son grew up and became a middle grade reader, I saw what he was reading, adventure books. He wanted books that thrilled him. So I want to share with you my 10 ways that I've discovered on how to thrill kids, no matter what genre you're writing, to surprise them. Definitely put the kids in charge. I'd already mentioned this before because kids don't want to read books about grown-ups having adventures. I mean, we can definitely have grown-ups in our books on the fringe. I do, but the kids are really in charge, which leads to have the kids figure out how to take the bad guys down. Not mom and dad, not the teacher. Kids want to see themselves as the heroes, not grown-ups for sure. And whatever bad situations they get themselves in, have your young characters navigate their own way out. And especially don't dwell too much on the dark stuff when you're writing for kids. I mean, maybe you can do so more for young adult, but I would say hold back on the gore, right? Because kids can use their imagination. They are creating that movie in their mind. If you remember back in time doing that, we still do that as adult readers. And give them friends in their travels. We all need friends in life. It makes life so much easier, especially when the road is hard. And a kid needs other friends to help him along his adventures for sure. Have the kids discover their own strength and courage to overcome the challenges that are happening to them in their story. And here's another fun thing to do. Make everything seem lost, for sure. End the chapters on cliffhangers. Kids love chapters that end on cliffhangers because it really keeps the mystery going. It keeps them wanting to turn the pages and finding out what happens next. And have it all work out in the end, at least partially, maybe not all the way, but even if things seem doomed for a while, have it work out partially in the end at least. And definitely, when you're writing for kids, add in some humor because interjecting that dollop of funny can alleviate the tension at times, especially if you're writing a heavier book. So, my book that came out in 2025, Moonco Summer, is a contemporary realistic book set at a campground by a lake, which is actually the setting that is a true setting. My parents owned and operated a campground when I lived in New England. And this setting is the setting for the story. Now, the story has grief and loss in it, bird conservation, the Appalachian Trail, but it can be heavy at times when you're talking about grief in a story, especially for kids. So I tried to add humor and lighten the load with adding quirky characters. So we have all these quirky campground characters in the story that are colorful, that are vibrant, that add some humor, along with an uncle who spouts off funny words of wisdom. So add a little bit of funny to your story, even if it's more of a heavy story. Definitely add that dollop of humor. And finally, number 10, if you can, make it a series. Have that final resolution to your story, but leaving the door open just in case you want to make it a series because kids love to follow their favorite characters into more books. I've written series and I've written standalone. So sometimes you never know you're writing a standalone and you might have a dream like I've had. You wake up and you thought, wait a minute, I need to write book 2. So leave the door open just in case, even if you have a final resolution in your story. So we talked about ways to engage kids before we're getting to harnessing that inner childlike wonder. One final way to engage kids, one of my favorite ways, it involves world building. I love world building, especially since I also write fantasy and I can actually get bogged down in world building, which you might as well. Sometimes I just go off on a tangent. I create this whole Bible for world building. But when it comes to engaging with kids with world building, one thing we want to aim to do is pick an image system. So watch out for overuse of multiple and mixed modifiers. I'm guilty of this. And what I mean by this, I'll give you an example of something my editor called me out on in my first children's book, Joshua and the Lightning Road. I had a lot of multiple and mixed metaphors. For example, if the trees in your story look like wizards in one scene, don't have them look like the Jolly Green Giant in another scene. Pick an image system. So I picked the wizard image system for the trees, and I built on that through the story. So that's what you want to do. Don't mix imagery, build on it through the story. And select which images are important to the scene, to the character development, to the plot. Young readers get it. They can visualize it. Throwing too many images at them will pull them out of the story. It will create a chaotic visual. I know this, I'm guilty of this, but also because a long time ago, I used to be a literary agency intern for a New York agency, and I would read manuscripts for the agent. They were manuscripts she was interested in, but didn't know if she wanted to give her full attention to and read. So I would read them for her and kind of give her an outline on whether I recommended the book and issues in the book. Now, I will say, 98% of the time, these manuscripts were not ready for publication. They had so many issues. And I actually have created a course out of this that I teach at writing conferences and on Udemy online. I have a course about how to get your manuscript past that gatekeeper, the agent, the intern, even your readers, if you are self-publishing. One of the ways here is having too many images thrown at you. Again, that chaotic visual. I definitely encountered these in manuscripts for the agency that I used to read for. Give kids just enough. I like to say, meet them in the middle with the imagery that you're giving them. They will fill in the rest. They will use their imagination. They will create that movie in their mind. And I want to read an example of this from a very well-known book, Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. So in the first book, we have Harry Potter who is going to Hogwarts School, the School of Wizardry, for the very, very first time. So he is approaching this school. If you've seen the movie, if you've read the book, you know what it looks like, this big imposing place. But this is all we get. This is all we get. Here we go. He is approaching Hogwarts for the first time. The narrow path had opened suddenly onto the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. "No going forward to a boat," Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water by the shore. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. "Everyone in," shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. "Right then, forward." and the fleet of little boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. That's it. That's all we get with Harry going to Hogwarts for the first time, because we don't want to overwhelm them with too many images, make it chaotic, bog down the story, keep moving on, give them enough, meet them in the middle so they can create their own visuals. Now, something else I will say too, when it comes to imagery, think of using all the sensory details. We live our life with all of our five senses, right? So your characters are experiencing that as well in your book. Give that to your readers for sure. Use all of your senses. So I vividly remember I had this interview a long time ago with my first children's book, Joshua and the Lightning Road, and he featured my book on his blog, and he asked me this question related to senses. I never forgot it. He asked me, scents and smells play a big part in your descriptions. It makes your settings even more realistic. When you say, he smelled like a wet dog that had been swimming in sour milk, I knew exactly how revolting that was. Did you use scents on purpose? Yes, I did. Absolutely. I use scents on purpose because scents, they can hold such powerful memory triggers. When you first smell a new scent, you tie it to a person or an event. And just like the scent of fresh cut grass on a summer day can remind you of summer, even if it's late autumn, it's 50 degrees out, somebody's cutting their grass and you smell that. Oh my gosh, that link to that memory just pops right open and you feel like it's summer with the scent of that. It just pops open, and give your readers that link. Give them that sensory detail for sure. Using imagery also gets your readers closer to the characters. So show us that setting from their point of view. And I want to read from a book here, a really fun book. It's a middle grade called Dead End in Norvelt by Jack Gantos, an award-winning book. It's a little bit autobiographical because it's based on his life as a 12-year-old boy in the 1960s growing up in Pennsylvania in this small town. And he does a wonderful job of showing us this world through his eyes of this character during this time period. And I want to just read a couple short passages here. He carries this throughout the book consistently as well. Here we go. Life in Norvelt was pretty quiet, but I could still never get any sleep. Even though it was a Sunday, Mr. Spiz stopped by the house and rapped his chunky monkey knuckles crazily on the front door at about 7 o'clock in the morning. "Anybody home?" he hollered. The volume on his raspy voice was stuck on maximum, and he nearly blew you down like the big bad wolf when he talked. He was a heavy breather on account of his asthma, which was why he didn't fight in the war, even though he had a military flat-top haircut that looked like an airport for paper airplanes. How fun is that? We are getting these images from this character's point of view. We have chunky monkey knuckles, we have the big bad wolf, an airport for paper airplanes. Here's another real short one. He's talking about another character in this scene. Let's see. Mr. Fenton trailed off as he scratched a part of his body that made me look away. If it was a museum of human freaks, I thought, he could be the first display. He looks like a human corn grub with crusty wire-rimmed glasses over his bugged-out snow globe eyes. How fun is that? Corn grub, snow globe. I mean, it's such a great voice throughout this book. Highly recommend reading Dead End in Orville by Jack Gantos if you're looking for a really vibrant middle grade voice. It shows us the world from that character's point of view for sure. And I have another book here. This is actually a young adult, another award-winning book called Shipbreaker by Paolo Bacigalupi. Hopefully I'm saying his name right. This is a darker book. Again, young adult. We can go more edgy. We can go more dark for those teen years. And this is set in a dystopian world, futuristic world, where there is no fuel, there's no oil, and these oil tankers have been kind of grounded on beaches. And so these young people scavenge them for all kinds of parts to make a living, basically just to survive. So we have this main character, Naylor here, a teenage boy who is scavenging in the belly of this old oil tanker. Not fun, pretty dark and scary. And we're seeing it through his eyes. So here's a little bit of a scene from him. His little phosphor LED showed the dusk snake slither where the copper cables had gone before him. He crawled over desiccated rat bodies and their nests. Even here, in the belly of an old oil tanker, there were rats, but these ones had died a long time ago. He crawled over more bones, small ones that came from cats and bits of birds. Feathers and fluff floated in the air. This close to the outside world, the access ducts were a graveyard for all sorts of lost creatures. He crawled over more bones. His little phosphor LED showed the dust snake slither where the copper cables had gone before him. He crawled over desiccated rat bodies and their nests. Even here, in the belly of an old oil tanker, there were rats, but these ones had died a long time ago. He crawled over more bones, small ones that came from cats and bits of birds. Feathers and fluff floated in the air. This close to the outside world, the access docks were a graveyard for all sorts of lost creatures. Ahead, sunlight showed a glaring brightness. Naylor squinted as he clawed toward the light, thinking that this was what rebirth must be like for the life cult. This climbing toward clean, blazing sunshine. And then he spilled out of the duct and onto hot steel decking. He tore off his mask, gasping. Wow, that's a really intense scene, and we're really in his point of view here, which is carried throughout this book. Really excellent book. Highly recommend it. Shipbreaker, if you're interested. So I hope I'm showing you some ways that you can really get in your character's point of view using imagery and setting, and also really something to think about, which I've discovered along my writer path, is that think about how your character can view a setting after they've had a major turning point there. Think about this for yourself. Once you've experienced a major event in a familiar place, you can completely look at that place differently. And I want to share an example here from one of my favorite books. This is a middle grade called Surviving Bear Island by Paul Gretschy. I love survival stories. I love nature stories, and this is definitely one of them, especially if you want a good cry. It's very heartfelt. And in the story, we have a 12-year-old boy who is kayaking with his father where they live in Alaska, and they get separated. And so this 12-year-old boy has to survive by himself on Bear Island where there are bears. And so he is trying to survive, trying to find food, trying to find his father. And he's now seeing this place in a different light. And I want to share how the author does that. I'd eaten a fish and a half each in the last 2 days, leaving me with just 2 fish. And I wasn't even out of Hidden Bay. The leaves of the blueberry plants blazed deep red, a few shriveled berries clinging to the branches. The deer cabbage turned the muskegs into blankets of red and yellow with little bits of green mixed in. And the mountain peaks were dusted with fresh snow. I could see why my dad and mom loved this place, even though I mostly hated it now. Could you hate something this beautiful? I hated it and I loved it. If I could just eat the beauty, I'd never go hungry. But you can't eat beauty, and it seems I was always hungry. Such a great book. Highly recommend, especially if you like survival stories. So hopefully I've shown you how here to get into the mind of your young readers using imagery and setting and world building and all of that for sure. And now we're going to get to the juicy stuff. We're going to get to harnessing your inner child wonder to write for kids. And I had to throw out some fun photos here of my son, who was now 23. But when he was much younger, I got to witness him and his own child wonder that he experienced. For example, we were at Fenwick Island in Delaware one summer, and we set the alarm to get up to watch the sunrise, which he'd never seen. And you can see he's mesmerized by it, trying to touch the sun. Also, when he's younger, he's out there dancing in the rain in his colorful outfit. We should all put on a colorful outfit and go dance in the rain, right? To experience that inner childlike wonder again. And then the first snow of the season. He just looks like so in a wondrous zone right there, which is what we want to channel when we're writing for kids, no matter the age. So let's get to it, because we touched on all these things so far when it comes to knowing your kidlit audience and how to connect with them. So now we're going to jump into the fun stuff. And I want you to ask yourself, what filled you with wonder as a kid? I know so many things did. And when I go back and journal about it, which is something that you can definitely do. As an only child, my parents used to go visit their friends, and I was usually left up to my own devices to entertain myself. So remember, I loved Narnia C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I used to sneak off into coat closets at my parents' friends' houses and hide under the coats and the musty wool winter coats and all that. And if I sat there long enough, would I be transported to Narnia or another world? I really thought that because I still believed in magic at that age for sure. Remember what filled you as wonder, with wonder when you were a child? What evokes that childhood wonder for you? I grew up an only child on a mountaintop in upstate New York. So my playground, it was the forest, it was the woods, and I would walk along rock walls at night under the stars when the whole world was asleep. I would roam the woods and climb the trees as high as I could and sing songs to the trees, especially my John Denver songs because I was in love with John Denver and just knew I was going to marry him someday. As a matter of fact, my husband gave me my country roads, take me home water bottle. My friends still make fun of me for loving John Denver, but it's another way of keeping my childlike wonder going on there. So there's so many ways that we can evoke this childlike wonder. And it's really about being awed by the little things in life for sure. And it's not about returning to a childlike state. It's about being awed by the little things in our grown-up life. We have mundane lives sometimes, especially as grown-ups. It can really dull our wonder. But there are still miraculous things in those little things, those little parts of our life every day. And it's really hard to harness that when grown-up duties mount. I know, but I want to give you here 18 ways that you can harness your own inner childlike wonder when it comes to writing for kids. So let's jump into it. Well, first, I want to share a story, just an example of childlike wonder. So last winter, I remember seeing these two kids sledding. Up and down the hill they went. They were just laughing and giggling. It went on and on and on. I was actually mesmerized by them. And their laughter and joy reminded me of being 10 years old and how a whole day of sledding was so magical. And where we lived on this mountain, we had this giant hill that we would sled down, and we would slam our sleds on this frozen pond and spin around, and our dogs would run down with us, and we'd run back up and do it all over again all day long. It was so magical. But I also remember turning 12. That was the year I started sleeping in on Christmas. I wasn't excited to get up early, and I also didn't want to go sledding anymore. And I vividly remember being so sad about that. I knew things were changing for me. So this is what your young readers are experiencing as well, right? Those new experiences, those changes within themselves, their friends, and their family. So let's jump into here to the 18 ways that you can harness your inner childlike wonder to write for kids. One fun thing to do: revisit pictures of yourself as a kid. Search through those specific memories, not just what's in the picture, but try and remember what's going on outside the edges of those pictures. What were you excited about? What did you most desire? What made you sad? Journal about it. Really shoot yourself back to that time. And did you write diaries or journals when you were a child, a teen, a tween? I did. Here's a picture of some of my actual diaries and journals that I wrote in. Go back, reread them. I know this can be painful. It was painful for me to go back and read that young voice. Everything was so dramatic, black and white, life and death, very emotional, turbulent time. But there was also some wonderful things that went on too. And it really helped me get back into that middle grade voice that I write for. Now, if you have access to young people, perhaps in your family, who like being told stories, make up a story with them. It can be really fun. This is actually how I created my first children's book, Joshua and the Lightning Road, with my son, Joshua. We would sit out when he was much younger on the front stoop in the summertime under the stars, and he would say, "Mommy, Mommy, tell me a story." So I did, and we spun this story together about a boy named Joshua who discovers a lightning road, and he travels it to another world to rescue his friend, and he meets beasts and bandits and has all these adventures. And that turned into my first children's book. So you never know what could come of making up stories with young people. Definitely look at the world from a new perspective, a child's perspective. Make that snow angel. Hide in that closet looking for that Narnia world. Climb a tree. And in case you didn't know this, I just discovered recently that there are big wheels for grown-ups. How awesome is that? I think we should have a big wheel party and just get a whole bunch of them and cruise around the neighborhood. That would be really, really fun. Also, if you know any young people in your life who are the target age for your manuscript, what you're writing, ask them to read your manuscript. I did this with my son when he was a middle grader. I did this with other kids because they will help you see things in your story that don't ring true to them, their voice, their language, their dialogue, their actions. All right. So definitely that is a really great thing that you can do is get those young readers to read your manuscript and give you feedback. And they won't hold back in that feedback. I'm just telling you right now. So we got to have a thick skin for that. So here we go with number 6. One of the 18 ways to harness inner childlike wonder. It looks like my screen's off a little bit. It's like a little slow waking up today because it's so cold out where I am right now in Pennsylvania. Here's a fun thing you can do. Number 6, create a shared bucket list with some of your favorite kids that you know in your life. So this could be in your family, it could be kids that you babysit for. What do you dream of doing together? You might be really surprised with this. And number 7, read stories written by kids you know. So remember I mentioned in my author school visits, these kids, they were so creative and curious and just jumped right into the action with the stories. So if you have kids who write stories, ask, permission if you can read their stories to see what their point of view is, what they're feeling, what they're noticing, what they're seeing. What is this world that they're creating? Ask a kid to tell you an adventure they have had. How would they describe it? How would they share their story? So pay attention to that, to what they say and the words they use and what is most important to them that they focus on in this story. Here's a really important one that you can do that I've done, and draw a map of your childhood neighborhood. So it could be the town, just a street. It could even just be your house. Go back in your mind and think about what is there. Walk through it. Journal about it. What do you see? How do you feel? What events happened there? This can really jog some memories from your childhood to harness that inner childlike wonder. Here's something fun you can do too. Do a dramatic read aloud of a scene in your story from your manuscript or your book. Do it with another young person, even better. Give them a part and act it out. It could give you inspiration for your story on how to make it even more engaging for young readers. And I actually have a couple pictures here of some of my first stories that I wrote when I was young. I was writing fantasy. As you can tell by the title, The Bootleberry Framps. And apparently I thought I was an illustrator. I even drew the cover for it. But also in the back of the story, I found the author's biography by me and I wrote Donna Beckley, that was my name at the time. Donna Beckley wants to be a writer. Perhaps when she grows up, she might become a published author. So I knew then that I wanted to become a writer. Perhaps you always did too when you were a young child. So the fun part comes now in harnessing our inner childlike wonder to write for young readers and stay in that kidlit space, which is a magical space. Here we are talking about the 11th way to harness that wonder. Face a childhood fear. I did this. I'm telling you, I did this. So where I grew up, mostly in upstate New York on this mountaintop, we lived in this old farmhouse that had this really, really creepy cellar. It had like a dirt floor on it, and it had this latch door that you had to pull up and go down backwards on these ladder steps. It was very dark down there. There was a hole in the wall where I was sure dead bodies were buried. So I made myself go down there as an adult, face that cellar, face that dark hole, face that childhood fear. It could really bring back some memories to evoke your childhood feelings, to write that with your characters and in your book. Another fun thing to do, engage in child play. So whether you do tag or those snow angels or make something up, which is what my son Joshua and I did when he was young, we made up this silly game that we called Irish Jig Sock Wars. And we would get these big, long athletic socks, probably my husband's, I'm sure. And we would put on this really fast Irish jig music. And we would run around the living room, jumping up and down on the couch, whacking each other with these socks and just laughing ourselves silly. There was no purpose to it, except it was fun. It was exercise. We giggled. So definitely engage in that child's play if you can to revisit that. And I recommend eavesdropping on kids. I mean, make sure you're not doing it in a creepy way, but if you're at the mall, if you're at a park, listen, just pick up on their conversations, what they're saying, the words they use, what they're talking about, what they get excited about. This can be really fun. Take your notebook with you and take notes of that. Also revisit books that you loved as a child. Here are two of mine. Like I said, my actual copies, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and especially the Little House series. I loved so much as a young girl. I just really connected with Laura, and that sense of home is very nostalgic for me. And I actually reread the entire series every couple of years just to get back in that voice and feel that nostalgia and that home again, that connection I had with Laura. Again, this is a copy of my book as well. So revisit those books you loved, reread them. Here's something else that you can do too is interview people who have experienced what your young characters have experienced in your book. Interview people who experienced this as a child, about the same age range. So, for example, I'm adopted. I was in an orphanage for a while and then a foster home. I got adopted about 1 year old, and I had a young adult author who interviewed me about that for her book, about being adopted, and then about connecting with my biological family. So she got my perspective to help her with her story. So this is definitely something that you can do if you have access to people like that related to characters in your book. Highly recommend. A really unique way to get that insight for your young readers. And here are some pictures I threw up before we go on with the next one is pictures of me. These are pictures of me from when I was a child. Again, things that you can look at when you're trying to evoke that childlike wonder. Here I am dancing with pigeons in Trafalgar Square when we lived in England, catching my first fish at our campground that we lived at in New England. I love Laura Ingalls. My mom made me a prairie dress and bonnet I used to wear all the time, pretending to fish off our front porch and wearing my very posh uniform for the school that I went to in England, which was like a Harry Potter school, a big mansion on his old estate where I fell in love with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So, number 16, one way to harness this wonder is write your young self a letter. I have done this for sure. What would you tell your tween or teen self? What advice would you give your young self going back? This can be nostalgic, also bittersweet, maybe a little bit painful, but it will really bring back those memories, that kidlit voice, that time period, especially for the characters that you write in your story. Write a day in your life as a kid or even fictionalize it. I've done both of these. I've taken a scene of something that happened to me that was a little bit traumatic and I wrote it in a story. And then I've also just written a fictional day in my life from when I was 9 years old, living at this campground in New England. What was your typical day like? Think about it. Look at these pictures to remind yourself. Think about the edges of those pictures, like I had said before. And number 18, another really fun one to do. Go down, blast from the past to visit those places you spent as a child. I did this a few years ago when I was doing book research for my book that came out in 2025, Lone Coast Summer. I went back to this childlike setting, the campground my parents owned and operated in New England by lake, actually Squam Lake, where they filmed on Golden Pond. That movie's going back a few decades if you've seen that movie with Henry Fonda. But yes, we had our campground there. I went back by myself for a trip. I went back to my elementary school there. I toured the campground. It was so nostalgic. It was also sad because my mom had since passed as well. But it really, really brought back all that childlike wonder, all the memories, all the things I did. And I want to share with you an example here of a one pager story. Actually, not even a story. It's a day in my life from when I lived in this campground. So this is an example of something that you can do when you're going back to harness that inner childlike wonder. So here we have a day in the life of me at Bethel Woods Campground in 1978. Every day, I dream about getting my first dog. I imagine she is so real that when I come home from school, I run to meet her. Her name will be Beauty, after Black Beauty. But not yet. So while I wait, I keep busy roaming the campground we own. It's fun to wear my strap-on roller skates and hunt the woods for dead butterflies and shotgun shells. They make really cool noisemakers when you put them in old coffee cans. I'm lucky because there are always kids here to play with and swim with at the pool, which is awesome for an only child like me. I especially love to hang out in the recreation hall and play pinball machines and records on the jukebox. My favorite song is Escape by Rupert Holmes. Each morning, as I pick rotten apples in the orchard to feed our fat hogs, I get to pretend I'm my favorite hero, Laura Ingalls from Little House in the Big Woods. Mom says we'll even be butchering the hog soon, just like Laura did. Mom wants to make head cheese like Mrs. Ingalls did. Ew. But I want to blow up the pig's bladder like a balloon and roast its tail over the fire, just like Laura did. Little House on the Prairie is my favorite show, and sometimes I even pretend that Mr. Ingalls is my dad. After hog feeding time, I get to gather the eggs in the chicken coop. Today, I found a double yolk egg without a shell. It was see through and wobbly, just like a weeble, although I think it would fall down if I wobbled it. Tomorrow is dump day. I get to collect the trash with Dad from all the campsites. We even saw a bear last week. It's a totally smelly chore, but the best part is that I get to stand up in the back of our 1965 Ford truck and hang on to the wood sides as we cruise to the dump. Whee! It's almost as fun as snowmobiling on the camp trails in winter. If I help Dad out good, he even promised to take me fishing on Squam Lake this weekend to use my new tackle box. I caught my first pike there last month. Dad almost crashed the boat up on the rocks just so I could reel it in. Oh, and there's a big thunderstorm coming tonight, so I plan to sleep on the screened-in porch and watch the lightning all night long. Just don't tell Mom, okay? Well, time to go. Practice my after dinner show for Mom and Dad. I'm singing and dancing to The Wonderful Thing About Tiggers and On the Good Ship Lollipop on my record player. I even made my own sailor and Tigger costumes. I'm a blue fuzzy Tigger in my one-piece footed PJs, Dad's striped tie for a tail, and Mom's wig. Being 9 is the best. Getting a dog would make it even better. So I hope in that day in the life of me at 9 growing up, you can feel the voice, the child voice, the wonder of my day, of what was going on. And these were small moments, right? But they were big moments to me at that time in my life. So I really hope I've inspired you today with a favorite topic of mine, harnessing that inner childlike wonder to write for kids, for different audiences. Hope I've inspired you to tap into your own wonder to write for kids. And I want to thank you for being with me today. Thank you, Teresa and Jackie, for having me be part of the Storyteller Summit. It was such an honor to be here. I invite all of you here, listeners, to connect with me. And don't forget that I also have the handy guide that you can download with all the details that I talked about here today. I'd love to hear feedback, comments. I'd love to follow you back on social media as well. And I also want to throw out there that if you are a book blogger who reviews books with your online platform, I would love to gift you a copy for review of my newest book that's coming out March 2026, The Secret Winners Club. It's a contemporary with 3 points of view. Just email me your information. And in the story, it's another personal story to me. We have 3 kids in junior high who all have autoimmune skin disorders that are very visible, like I do. And they want to be known for more than just their skin condition. So they create the Secret Winners Club so they can beat out all the competition in their school clubs, theater and swim and junk bot clubs, so they can be number one and be known for more than just their skin conditions. But along the way, they cross the line, they hurt others, and they discover this makes them even more visible and even more of an outsider. So if this is something you're interested in reviewing for your online platform, just shoot me an email, let me know. I also have online courses for writers at udemy.com on how to get your manuscript past the gatekeepers, how to do author visits and public speaking for authors, and so much more. Just go to udemy.com and check out my name there. So thank you again for taking the time to be with me here today. I hope you were inspired to go find the wonder for your own stories for young readers. Thank you.